I'm not here to double down today. I'm not digging my heels in. Not really into that. In fact, I spent a good portion of yesterday's show saying, I think I've totally changed my mind on college football in an 8-team playoff. But I do think when you host a radio show in the current climate and in the current blogosphere climate, I have a right to actually run the full videotape of what I said yesterday. I don't think I should be defined by 16 seconds of a minute rant edited on a site owned by a blog company currently in a $100 million lawsuit for airing improper audio and video tape. I'll run my 57 seconds that yesterday somebody edited, took a segment of, and said, there's institutional racism. That host should be fired. I'm not here to double down, but I think I have a right to run the entire tape. Yes, the climate's different these days, and I think it hurts comedy more than guys like me. I don't think what I say often is that cringeworthy. I saw a story yesterday, Jon Stewart, unbelievable talent. Jon Stewart, Vulture magazine. Jon Stewart apparently told a African-American writer on his staff, blankety, blankety, blank, they got into an argument. And they got into an argument because the black writer was offended or, quote, cringed, unquote, when Jon Stewart, white, went on his show and did a rant. And in the rant, there was a bit where he impersonated Herman Cain, candidate who was black. And the black writer confronted Jon Stewart in a meeting and said, I was uncomfortable. I cringed. To that, I would say, all great comedy comes from the cringe. Amy Schumer, Louis C.K., Chris Rock, George Carlin, Eddie Murphy. The cringe often makes the comedy. I'm not sure if you write comedy, if you're writing it and you're never on a show that makes you cringe, that show probably sucks. Key and Peele, I laugh out loud. Some of it I cringe. Louis C.K., I laugh out loud. Some of it I cringe. The cringe makes the comedy. Now, I don't think the cringe makes the radio host. But yesterday I said something. We got into a discussion about baseball. And I said, soccer does this sometimes too, where it's like, you don't get the sport, you're not smart enough. Oh, stop it. Can we stop with the I don't get a sport because it's just too complex? And I said, think about baseball. In football, if a quarterback and a center couldn't communicate, spoke a different language, you couldn't run a play. In baseball, you can have a shortstop from Cuba, a pitcher from Korea, a second baseman from Brazil, and a catcher from Colorado. You could win a World Series. You can't even communicate. You could have major language barriers. Doesn't matter. Only 4%, 4.3%, last time the stats were taken according to Stats LLC in May of 2014, only 4% of the sport had a college degree. That includes managers and coaches. So I don't think I have to be Stephen Hawking to understand baseball. Most of the players didn't go to college. They seem to understand it. Many times the players can't even understand languages with their teammates. Doesn't matter. Then here's the part I said, and it got people riled up. Some people. I said, listen, a third or a quarter of the sports from countries with economic hardships that have created educational hurdles. Here's the actual tape that became, on the blogosphere, 57 seconds, a firestorm. I mean, the Marlins put a general manager in their dugout. People freaked out. Whoa, it's baseball. You don't think a general manager can manage? Like it's impossible? The game is too complex? I've never bought into that baseball's just too complex. Really? A third of the sport is from the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic has not been known in my lifetime as having, world-class academic abilities. I mean, a lot of those kids come from rough backgrounds and have not had opportunities academically that other kids from other countries have. Baseball's like any sport. It's mostly instincts. A sports writer who covers baseball could go up to Tony La Russa and have a real baseball argument, and Tony would listen, and it would seem reasonable. There's not a single NFL writer in the country that could diagram a play for Bill Belichick. We get caught up in this whole thinking man's game. That's it. I get when published out of context, a single quote, and you stop the tape. I understand it. I get it. I could have made the point without using one country, and there's all sorts of smart people from the Dominican Republic. I could have said a third of baseball's talent is now being furnished from countries with economic hardships, therefore educational hurdles. For the record, I use the Dominican Republic because they furnish baseball with so many great players. But they do rank 122nd out of 144 countries in primary education, according to the World Economic Forum Global Competitive Report. Nobody says everybody's anything. And I understand when you mention a specific country, they get offended. I get it. I do. And for that, I feel bad. I do. But I have 4 reports in front of me. World Bank, OECD, where there are discussions of major deficiencies in the education sector at all levels. Secondary, large management inefficiencies, teacher education, creates bottlenecks in the supply of secondary schools, 50% dropout rate. World Bank, major inequalities in the provision of primary and secondary education in the Dominican Republic. It wasn't a shot at him. It was data. I think 5-7 years ago I talked about this same subject. Was I clunky? Perhaps. Did people not like my tone? I get it. Sometimes my tone stinks. But I do think I have the right to play the entire tape. And I don't think I'm digging in. I'm not doing a Trump and doubling down. But I think when you host a radio show, just like Jon Stewart hosts a show, I think sometimes I bring up stuff the show before me doesn't, the show after me maybe doesn't. I do, that makes people cringe. I'm not saying there's not intelligent, educated people from the Dominican Republic. I cringe at the data too. Do we understand how lucky we are in America? That was the tape yesterday, and I wasn't on Twitter much, had to fly around with my kids. I think we live in a climate now, stats and facts, sometimes, even when presented, are overwhelmed by comments from comedians, from hosts, makes people uncomfortable, makes me uncomfortable too. But the topic really was, stop telling me baseball's too smart for me. And soccer fan does it sometimes too. Baseball's multilingual, so is soccer. Seamless, doesn't matter. I don't think you could do that in football. I don't think if Peyton Manning spoke one language and his center and wide receiver the other, I don't think you could audible a single play. Forget a series, forget a season, forget a game. I don't think you could audible a play. Could a multilingual football team work? I don't think it could. And that was my point.